Awesome. I can see that we're live now. I'm not sure, Alisa, if you had in your introduction anything about having people or students introduce themselves.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We should. That's a great idea.
Yeah, maybe just if you want to write where you're from, what you're studying. We're waiting for a few more people to join. But in the meantime, we'd love to see where our audience is coming from. So we'll see. That pops up. I'll keep you updated if there's anything coming in. Thank you everyone for joining us. I think we're just waiting about a minute and we'll to see who's coming in. Oh, I see Tyra's from Canada. Hello, Tyra. And Lois from France. Haley from the Cayman Islands. Wow, that's incredible. Tony is from Brighton. Graduated master's in history. He's been unable to find meaningful and impactful work despite trying. So hopefully, Alisa, you'll be able to inspire him today. Kira's from Brighton. Hey, Kira. Awesome. It's so nice to see so many people from all around the world.
Yes, welcome everyone.
Awesome. Is it Mathilde? I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but again, from France. Bonjour. Isaac from Brighton, Gabriella from Dubai, Jillian from New York. Wow. Serena's works at the University of Sussex Business School, Sussex alum in international relations and living in Hove. Wow, we've got people from all around us, which is amazing.
Very international group.
Yeah, definitely.
Impressive.
Okay. Seeing how some more people. All right, so I think we can get started. Sounds great. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Make an Impact event. Thank you so much for attending, and it's great to have all of you joining us today. As you may know, this series aims to inform and inspire you about the variety of career paths that can lead you to places and positions where you can make a positive impact on the world. The purpose of this event is to introduce you to professionals who will discuss their career journey and accomplishments. All of our guest speakers come from diverse academic and career backgrounds, and we'll talk about their journeys. So where they started, their academic history, their career path, and possibly what's next for them. Each speaker brings a unique perspective as to creating positive change and brings fresh insight as to what impact means to them. My name is Ella, and I'm a second-year law student here at Sussex. I will be moderating today's event, and I'm so excited to be introducing you to an amazing woman who believes that when you empower a girl, you empower an entire community and generations beyond. Alisa Roadcup holds certifications in forced migration from Northwestern and Oxford Universities, a bachelor's degree in Humanities, and an MA in Comparative Religions. She has had an 18-year career focused on advocating for women and girls in the human rights sector, namely refugees and asylum seekers, especially those displaced throughout Sub-Saharan Africa. As someone who's on the pathway to becoming a human rights lawyer myself, I was talking to a legal aid Ontario professional, and she'd said something that truly stuck with me. And that is, in this field of work, your role isn't just to give people facing difficult situations a voice. Your role is to help them find their own voice as well. And that's exactly what Alisa does. She's led an award-winning international non-governmental organization called RefuSHE and has been honored as International Leader by Chicago Woman Magazine and named a 2017 Emerging Leader by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Alisa has been featured through various media sources, such as BBC Worldwide and ABC7 Primetime News, and frequently speaks on issues of forced migration and women's rights. Alisa currently serves on the Chicago Council on Global Affairs Women and Global Development Advisory Committee and is president of the Chicago Refugee Coalition. Alisa will be talking to you about her career and story, but also providing advice on how to write your own story, and using that, how to make a positive impact in the world with your own unique experiences. At the end of the session, we will have a question and answer period, so please write down any questions you may have or feel free to type them into the chat box. Also, I wanted to quickly premise before we begin that any inappropriate comments, hate, or discrimination will not be tolerated, and that by signing up for this event, you have agreed to comply with the Sussex Student Union's zero tolerance policy. Once again, thank you for attending, and I will pass the mic on to Alisa now.
Thank you so much, Ella. I am going to go ahead and get us technologically set up here.
Sounds good.
One moment. Okay, can you see my screen?
I can see that.
Awesome. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ella, for that very kind introduction. And I'm so grateful to be here with you all today, and so honored to be asked by Aishna Shah to share my story, or at least my story thus far of my career journey with you all. As Ella mentioned, I currently serve as the president of the Chicago Refugee Coalition, whose sole focus is on alleviating food scarcity for refugees. And we do that by facilitating corporate partnerships to place fresh produce into the hands of Chicagoland's refugees. So we already covered all the rest of my credentials. I'll just go ahead and Ella did that so eloquently. So here's what we'll be talking about today. We'll be covering a lot of ground, starting with my story as Aishna has asked me to prepare for you all, a discussion of what impact is, current thinking and definitions around impact, and especially how we're going to be, the lens in which we're going to be looking at impact during our conversation here, the importance of inner reflection on the journey to self-knowledge, and wrapping it up with our outer lives, or our work into the world and into the future. So in order to properly share our stories, it's important to start at the very beginning, and these are the people who signify my origins, my beginning. On the left is my maternal grandfather and grandmother, Gladys and Max Ward, my parents, David and Karen Roadcup, and then my paternal grandparents on the right, Evelyn and William Roadcup. So these are the people who I owe my existence to, and I honor them at this time. I was born to Karen and David in the shadow of the Ozark Mountains of Southwest Missouri in May of 1976 to an X-ray tech nurse mother and a minister father. We were an evangelical Christian family steeped in an ethos of spirituality and service. My maternal grandfather, Max Ward Randall, on the left, was a medical missionary who built and piloted a Cessna plane throughout Southern Africa in the 50s and the 60s, establishing schools, churches, and hospitals. And to the right are my paternal grandparents. My grandfather was a worker on the Cincinnati Railroad, and my grandmother was the most flawless cook of comfort food that you will ever find. And while my family was deeply religious, as a child, I began to realize a stark difference in the way that women and men were treated in my own religious, spiritual community, in my family, and in the world. This disparity confused me. I didn't understand why women and girls couldn't be afforded the same opportunities as men. My confusion eventually evolved into my adolescent and high school years into more of a righteous, rebellious anger around this gender inequality. And so I decided to go to seminary and study theology. And this path, which we'll talk about more in just a few minutes, eventually led me into my career into international development and human rights. So these photos were taken of me right about the same age that many of you probably are. I was 20 or 21 in my junior year of uni. And this on the left is of me taking tea at the Grand Bazaar in Cairo with my parents. I think we were trying the hookah for the first time. And at this time in my life, I distinctly remember a feeling of being so lost in terms of what I was going to do when I graduated. That summer, I was working at a stockist at a grocery store during the day and waiting tables at night. And the picture on the right, you can clearly also see that, we were in Port Said. It was the same trip in Egypt. And I was meeting some new girlfriends on the beach there, and I was profoundly unhappy that my father was interrupting this very private moment that I was having with these beautiful women. So you can sort of see a bit of my angst and discontent coming to the surface in that photo. But this quote is one that I thought encompassed this moment in my life so perfectly, by one of my favorite authors and writers, Joan Didion. All I knew then was what I wasn't, and it took me some years to discover what I was. And discovering what I was something that I had to live into, similar to the notion that making a real impact with one's life and career takes time. So what is impact? I know that everyone is thinking and talking a lot about it. It's a buzzword across all public, private sectors. If we could just take a minute and popcorn into the comments section. In one word, what does impact mean to you? I know we have a little bit of a delay, so I'll highlight some of the other categories of impact that we'll just touch on here. But in terms of getting an idea of where you all are coming from for Q&A and so forth, please go ahead and take a minute to reflect in one word. What does impact mean to you right now? There are no wrong answers. So we see impact spoken of in terms of leadership development, in terms of developing organizational capacity and pathways to growth. In terms of influence and power, impact is a very key notion in terms of leadership development. Social change, the humanitarian sector, many funders have very clear understanding of what impact is and how it's communicated and conveyed, tracked, monitored, and so forth. So tracking and expressing impact in the humanitarian sector and social change is another way of looking at impact. Social enterprise and scale and impact investing. So looking at social change through the lens of return on investment and the opportunities to perhaps shift to more sustainable funding models for nonprofits and profitable models for investing is also a trend right now in the impact conversation. And then, of course, programming, being able to monitor and evaluate the impact that a particular program is having on a community or an individual is really key and really important. But for the purpose of this discussion here, in the brief amount of time that we have, I'd like us to consider what impact means through the lens of your own personal experience and professional longings and passions. So I'll say that one more time. To frame the purpose of this discussion, I'd like us to consider what impact means through the lens of your own personal experience and professional longings and passions. So Ella, can you share quickly what some of the feedback of impact was from our?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for all your input. I'm not going to say everybody's name just due to time, but it's great to see so many people commenting. One of the biggest words I actually see popping out here is the word change, which Alisa, you were mentioning just a moment ago. So change I see quite a few times. And that's actually the word that came to my mind immediately. I see improvements, influencing the people around you, reduced inequality, imposing positive change on a deep level, individual or collective, meaningful work, felt, empowerment, promoting equality, and lasting impression. So those are some pretty amazing. One more popped in. I'll just say this last one. Efforts to make things change and solve problems. It's fantastic.
I love it. Thank you. Those are so rich and so thoughtful. So thanks for your input, guys. Okay, so this here is a very interesting timeline, one that I have never really been asked to do in quite such a way. But Aishna has asked me to share with you all my professional milestones through the lens of the impact that I felt like I've made at key moments in my career. So I'll start here on the bottom left during my college and seminary years. As I had mentioned, I've had a lot of internships and really hustled to get my foot in the door to all of those. So the first that I wanted to share was during my sophomore year of college, I interned at a medical mission hospital in Zimbabwe, the same one that my grandfather had founded. And here's a picture of me in the lab. I think I'm prepping a tuberculosis sputum. But I had the opportunity in that role to go on well baby days and deliver vaccinations, to assist in labor and delivery, and to teach. And that experience really began to show me that my particular proclivity for meaningful work had to do with direct relationship with people, with a face-to-face contact, with seeing an impact that you're making in real time with individuals. And this sort of led into a stream of other work that I did in college. I volunteered with Mother Teresa's Sisters of Charity in Atlanta with women who were transitioning their lives, who were dying of AIDS. And I learned from the sisters the ability to be present to suffering and to serve, and to understand that no job is beneath me, whether I was doing prayers with the nuns, or whether I was scrubbing the floors or the toilets or feeding people. Nothing is beneath is beneath you in terms of ways that you can show up in your workplace, in your careers, and be humble, and really have a spirit and an attitude of humility and service, no matter what the context of the work is, or the culture of the organization that you're working in. I became really interested in monastic and contemplative life. I wrote my thesis on a Cistercian Trappist monk. I went really deep into theological studies, and then I had this particular moment that was sort of revelatory for me, and I call it a kismet moment. It's a Hebrew word that means sort of like synergy or synchronicity. And I was getting ready for work. I was watching Oprah Winfrey's show, and there were these two women who were sharing from Amnesty International, who were sharing the story of a woman named Amina Lawal. And Amina had become an urgent action issued by Amnesty International. She'd been sentenced to death by stoning for having a child out of wedlock. And I remember sitting in front of the TV watching these women from Amnesty tell this woman's story and give voice to this issue of injustice, and then promoting it across the world for people to take action. And so the way Amnesty works is that it's sort of like this strategy for social change is around sort of calling out injustice, public shaming, speaking directly to power, to government officials, to ambassadors, and so forth. So I think this urgent action was directed toward the US ambassador of Nigeria on behalf of Amina Lawal. And I remember being so captured by the way these women were speaking, by their passion, and then it sparked in me sort of that knowing of, this is the kind of work that I think I want to do. I want to make the world a safer place for women and girls. So moving on to my early career, I went on to continue my theological studies in Boulder, Colorado, and I was told by a professor that there was an Amnesty office in Nederland, Colorado, which was like 10 miles up the canyon in this tiny little snow town of 10,000 people. And I was really surprised. There was an Amnesty International office there, but there was, and it was the Urgent Action Office. And so I showed up, I said, I would really appreciate the opportunity to get involved however I can. I started as an intern. A few months later, they hired me in my first job with Amnesty as a program associate. And in my first interview, I was asked, why Amnesty? Why are you interested in this role? And I said, well, I heard about the story about Amina Lawal, And I was so moved by it. And it actually also provided me with this way to learn how to become an activist and how to get involved in global issues. And they said, well, that urgent action was issued here in this office. And when that happened, when that Oprah story happened, our servers crashed because there was such an overwhelming, over 1 million people took action on behalf of this woman to advocate for her rights. And it was just that moment of like kismet and synchronicity. And I was like, okay, this is where I need to be. I'm in the right place at the right time. So looking for those patterns of synchronicity, listening to sort of that like prick of your conscience, or like the sort of place of tenderness in your heart where you become really moved around an issue, is a really good thing to start paying attention to as you're discerning your process of what it is that you want to do, where you want to work specifically. So early in my career, I went to work for Amnesty International. I was involved in the first ever global anti-violence against women campaign, the Stop Violence Against Women campaign. I learned about the human rights framework, and I learned about the power of campaigning and messaging in terms of shaping hearts and minds around social justice issues. So moving on to the Voices and Faces project, I moved to Chicago, and I met a woman named Anne Ream, who's the founder of the Voices and Faces project. And what they do, part of what they do, is they train individuals who are survivors of sexual violence or trauma in a storytelling writing workshop, how to tell their own stories. And I didn't mention that when I was in college, I was actually assaulted by the owner of the restaurant I was working for. And I had prosecuted him and gone through a legal process. And I sort of just like brushed it under the rug, right? Like it was something that happened, I'd moved past it. And when I met Anne, she asked me to share my story with the Voices and Faces project. So for the first time in my life, I was met with sort of this challenge of sharing the vulnerable parts of my life, the questions of am I ready to come out as a survivor? Is it the right time? And I needed it to be the right time. Speaking out as a survivor, some people will never speak, and that's okay too. But I had realized that in about the decade between what had happened and then where I was in my career, when I met her, that I was ready, and I was grateful that she'd asked me to share my story. And for me, it prompted this broader question of the narrative arc of our own lives. And I realized that we are the architects of our own story. No one but ourselves can tell our story for ourselves. And we get to choose the moments, the situations, the key like points of definition that shape who we are and who we're going to become. And for me, speaking out about becoming a survivor of sexual violence was a really critical part of finding my own voice, of becoming more embodied and confident as a leader, but then also realizing that speaking out in this way can be a way of healing for myself, for a lot of other people, and it was informing also the trajectory of my career and what I was deciding to do. So moving on, I also worked for a good amount of time in interreligious peace building, movement building. Here's a picture of me with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the most sacred, special moments of my career at the 2009 Parliament of the World's Religions. And I started at the Parliament of the World's Religions because I'd studied comparative religions before. I knew about the Parliament. I knew when I moved to Chicago that I wanted to go to work there. It was a dream job, just like Amnesty was. And so I printed out my resume. I took it to the office. I offered to volunteer because I knew no one in Chicago. And within a couple weeks, I was initially hired as an associate in development. By the time the Parliament came around, I was the director of marketing and communications for the company. And so I've been able to sort of interweave this passion that I have for women's equality, gender justice, faith, peace building, with a number of different roles and responsibilities that have just offered me incredible opportunities in my career. And lastly, my work in refugees and forced migration, which has been about the focus for about the last decade. Last year, I managed the national campaign for refugees and asylum for Amnesty International USA. So I was able to take those early career sort of like, sea legs that I had acquired in my work with Amnesty as just, an early graduate, and step into the organization and have one of the most senior campaigning roles in my area of passion and expertise. Also, for 7 years, I led this international NGO called RefuSHE, which I'll speak a little bit about their work in a bit. But in terms of looking at impact, when I started, we were at about $500,000 budget per year. When I left, we were at 3.1. We brought in an implementing child protection partnership with the UNHCR during the time that I was there, which scaled our programmatic impact exponentially. We opened 3 satellite locations, case management locations. We were resettling more young women. It was just, there was a time of extraordinary growth. And then also Angelina Jolie came to our organization on World Refugee Day and was so moved that she decided to fund us and then to make a documentary and a video. And so all of a sudden we were all over the map in Vanity Fair, no, Harper's Bazaar. And she was just a huge ally. And it was a really interesting experience. And then of course my work with the Chicago Refugee Coalition. So I hope that what comes out of this is that there's a definite arc of a career with ebbs and flows, that taking the initiative to start as a volunteer, an intern, getting your foot in the door is so key. Being humble, being willing to do anything that anyone asks you, going above and beyond, right? Coming early, staying late, being dependable, asking really good questions of your supervisors. These are the kinds of things that will edify you in your growth, and then will also make an impression on the people around you. So Ishna had also asked me to share about a challenge in terms of case studies around impact and scale. And these are the beautiful young women of RefuSHE, and these are the artists within the artisan collective called the Maisha Collective. And RefuSHE has a holistic model of intervention for the most vulnerable of refugee girls from throughout East Africa. So all of the girls in the programs are separated, unaccompanied, or orphaned. And the organization provides a whole sort of 360 approach: case management, legal medical advocacy, education, safe shelter, and then the social enterprise, this beautiful project where the girls hand, resist, dye fabrics, and then we sell the scarves to a local market, but primarily make a profit off of a Western market. And we were approached by a funder, a Canadian funder, who said, we see there's a tremendous opportunity to scale these gorgeous fabrics and to sell them. And so what I want you to do is create a plan to, I think it was exponentially grow the production and sales of the products by 8 times over the course of 2 to 3 years. And she said, you're going to have to come, you're going to have to pitch in front of the board of the foundation, and I'm going to help you structure this pitch. And so it was a very business driven pitch that talked about, growth, scale, profitability, and it was something that we worked really hard on for a long period of time. And it was a delicate thing too, right? Because this program for these women is largely and fundamentally therapeutic. It's programmatic. It wasn't built to be a massive income generator, but it was a significant income that helped the NGO be sustainable. So we, myself and a couple board members even, I think, and my colleagues, we got on a plane, we flew up to Canada, we got into the boardroom, and the program officer said, oh, the son that I had wanted to pitch this to, right, that we had shaped this pitch for, the son is not able to join us today. Instead, he's sending his wife. And so we were like, okay, like that's great. But his wife had worked in the humanitarian field, and the way that we had shaped the pitch was not hitting on all cylinders for her. She was asking all the right questions, right? She was like, hey, don't these young women come out of a lot of trauma? And could trying to sort of scale this in a really ambitious way be, contribute to the sort of commodification of their efforts and their energies? A lot of questions that we had really wrestled with in relation to our conversations with the program officer. So there was one situation where we had to sort of regroup and go back to the foundation again, reshape the proposal. We ended up getting the funding. It was our first six-figure family funding partnership. But it was really an interesting scenario where we had poured so much time and resource into this pitch for this one particular family member, and then he wasn't there, and his wife was there, and the whole thing went off the railroad tracks, right? So this is an example that, when you look at humanitarian funding, many times there's the risk of sort of mission deviation, where it's like, are you aligning yourself with the needs of the donors or the agencies, or are you really standing true to the core mission that the organization has? It's a real challenge in the NGO sector. And then one other story is just that we had been invited by UNHCR to do a collaborative artisan project with a group based in one of the refugee camps of Kenya called Kakuma. It was a settlement of Kakuma called Kalobey, and they had really talented artisans there. And so it was sort of this joint project of urban refugees and camp-based refugees making some really beautiful products. And yes.
Do you mind just explaining what the UNHCR is for anybody who's not too sure?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. There we go with the acronyms. It's the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So it's sort of the branch, the bureau that oversees global refugee aid and resettlement. Thanks, Ella. And so we got the funding. We ordered all of the supplies, we ordered the machinery. It was delivered, like all of this was delivered to a refugee camp, which is, a very, very sort of desolate desert kind of place in northeastern Kenya. And the project kicked off, and 2 weeks later, this massive sandstorm came through, which when everyone turned on their sewing machines, grinded the engines to a halt. Right. So some of the challenges of scale are, when you're working in areas that have had environmental or climate emergencies, or in areas affected particularly by violence or violent conflict. You're dealing with a multiplicity of complexities all at the same time when it comes to scale. So anyone working in international development will always have a lot of commentary and a lot to say to you about the challenges, but these challenges also present tremendous opportunities to be nimble, to learn, to grow, to assess, to figure out how to do better next time. So in terms of takeaways from this talk around impact and telling your own story, there's just a few things I want to highlight for you that I think could be helpful. Importance of looking, listening, and hustling. So in looking, I would encourage you probably, being in the business school or in graduate school or undergraduate, you've probably done your own personal mission statement. I would say make an impact statement part of that. Think about the long-term effects that you would like your career to have, and then revisit it every year as you go through sort of your personal annual goals. Take a look at that and come back to it. Look for the kismet moments along the way. Look for the signs that your own inner promptings or the universe or people around you who love you, look for those signs that are coming your way. And then visit with your future self. And this is a really interesting exercise that I do every once in a while whenever I'm presented with a dilemma or something that I just really need clarity on. And what I do is I sit down in a quiet place and I close my eyes and I imagine meeting with myself at the age of 60 and then 80. And like when I come to the door, I'm still here in Chicago. I'm still here in this house. You know, I've got like pearls and a cashmere sweater on. I'm myself at 80 years old. And I'm looking at the perspective of my life in retrospect. And I sit down and I have a cup of coffee with my future self. And it's this really interesting conversation between the two of us of discernment, of trying to see and envision, like, how, if I did this, how would it look? How would it get me to that dream of the kind of life and legacy and person that I want to be when I'm 80 years old? The importance of listening. So listen to your inner compass, of course. We've talked about that. Consider what others around you are saying. Sometimes they can see things in us we can't see in ourselves. And listen more than you speak. Ask really good questions. This is also really important in terms of your relationships with your supervisors. Be humble, listen more than you speak, and think about really, having substantive and meaningful dialogues with, especially with your supervisors. And lastly, hustle. So take the initiative, women especially, when you're in a group or a presentation or you're at a conference and there's opportunity to ask a question, stand up, ask the question, right? Be exemplary. So this is another key component of just striving for excellence in all that you do and letting that demarcate sort of the brand and the way that people think and feel about you. And during COVID here in the United States, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, was giving daily sort of updates, and he was stepping in as a leader. We're all watching him, and he would tell people on his daily briefings, remember Excelsior, which I think is the New York motto or something, state of New York motto or something. I'm probably butchering that, but Excelsior as a personal mission, I was so inspired by, because if you are striving to deliver the very best of yourself, to be the best that you can be, to rise above the fray, right? You're going to do well. I've never stopped learning and building your portfolio, of course, is sort of a given. And then throughout the course of your career, always be a mentee and always be a mentor. So imagine, who's the person in your realm that you think has inspired you most professionally? Is it Richard Branson? Is it one of your professors? Is it, who knows? See if you can reach out to that person. And I mean, maybe Richard Branson would be a mentor to one of us. Maybe we should tweet him and see. I don't know. Maybe not. You could always try. But always have someone in your life that you have asked and said, hey, I need someone maybe just 4 times a year to chat with my questions, with my challenges. Will you meet with me for 1 hour, a quarter? And just ask, right? And see what they say. It could be anyone. And so I would say set your sights really high, but then always remember to be a mentor to someone who's coming up from underneath the ranks as well. And having that kind of cross pull push of nurturing and feeding, sort of pouring your expertise into people coming up behind you, and also having people who know more than you do pour themselves into you will be of great benefit to your career. So lastly, just some recommended resources. My friend Courtney Martin is an author. She writes a lot about careers of purpose. Parker Palmer, his 2 books, Let Your Life Speak and The Purpose Path, are really substantive. Poe Bronson is the book that I was reading, What Should I Do With My Life, when I happened upon the Oprah Winfrey Show with Amina Lawal. David Brooks, a New York Times columnist, The Road to Character, gives sort of, small, 8 or 10 vignettes of individual social leaders who made extreme impact in their lives and careers. And then seminars, classes, Love is a Force of Social Justice by Anne Firth Murray. It's free. It's on Stanford's online portal, and it's a really powerful look at different forms of love as a power to make social change. And then also the testimonial writing workshop at the Voices and Faces Project. There's the website. These are my personal details. Please feel free to reach in and connect with me on LinkedIn. And if I can be of service in any way to you, I would love to. And please just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alisa. Your story is so inspiring and motivating. And from what I can see from all these comments here, I think many people would agree with me. Yeah, it's just amazing, your journey. We have a few questions here. We do have about 20 minutes left, so I think it would be great to kind of start off with some of these. I see from Vedanti, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. They've said, what have been the biggest challenges in ensuring protection of the vulnerable women and girls in RefuSHE?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Vedanti. Thank you so much for that question. Challenges in terms of ensuring their protection. I mean, I think I could answer that from sort of a very local and then sort of national, international perspective, right? So unaccompanied refugee girls are amongst the most vulnerable of all of the world's refugees because they've been separated or orphaned from their families. So providing them with their basic, most lowest level on the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? Like community, safe shelter, water, basic needs. Having that in place is fundamental in order for people to heal and overcome and progress out of the traumatic experiences that they've had. So those most basic things, coupled, I think, with the importance of sisterhood and knowing that you're not alone in having experiences like this, is transformative for a young woman's healing, right? Just knowing that she's not alone. Nationally, we saw a number of directives against the refugees that were issued from the Kenyan government, primarily in response to terrorist attacks under a framework of national security and protection. But we faced multiple directives to close down our operations entirely and or even remove the refugees and sort of expedite them back to their countries of origin. This is like an illegal term called refoulement, which is sending a refugee or asylum seeker back to the place that they had fled and would be at risk doing so. So we were constantly navigating the local landscape, right? The national landscape of working with the country that we were serving to ensure that we had good working relationships there with the different sort of committees and individuals there who could keep us updated on what we needed to do and when and what they needed from us. And then, of course, just navigating the landscape under the most previously recent Trump administration here in the United States was just a barrage of challenges, right, in terms of funding, policies. So I think there's tremendous opportunity to be rebuilding in the sector of refugees and resettlement. And our president here has committed to reestablishing a lot of the norms and policies and like the resettlement threshold that had been in place before, 125,000 per year here in the US. So there are always a lot of challenges. And that's just part of like the nature of working in international development is you expect the challenges to come along constantly and you prepare for them, whether it's having contingency plans or just knowing that like this is the nature of the work. It's going to be unpredictable and we're going to have to really be nimble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. So we do have 15 minutes left and we have some amazing questions here. So for the audience, we're going to try and get through all of them, but I am going to kind of merge some of the questions together, some of the similar ones. We have a few questions here. From Allison says, how do you see the compounding factors of increased need and reduced budgets due to COVID impacting the development industry new hires? Which also kind of goes into the next question from Angeli, which says, what would be your advice for people struggling to get that work experience and those opportunities during COVID?
Well, I think those are excellent questions. Thank you so much. And in terms of the increased need but reduced budget due to COVID, it's my hope that within the philanthropic sector, that especially now that we have a new administration in the United States, which traditionally the United States was the leading country who was resettling refugees, second I think to Canada, that funding and resources are going to shift coming into the next year to the global resettlement structure. The regime under the previous administration really had been pretty decimated in a lot of ways. And so it's going to take some time to rebuild and restructure that. But I think that the funding and the resources are really going to come. I think COVID has been devastating in terms of how it's affected the overall health and wellness, access to education for women and girls globally. And just, I mean, honestly, it's going to take some time to assess fully the impact of how COVID has shifted the landscape there. So, I mean, I would say that that the funding is out there. It's also a matter of really being creative in the ways that NGOs and organizations and agencies fundraise. And I think that there's a more of a collective empathy for humanitarian issues and COVID now, because we have a really powerful ask to make and a lot of data to show the adverse effects of COVID on women and girls. And I think that in and of itself can be a motivating sort of talking point and factor when people like us who are working in NGOs and asking for money, bringing in resources, growing organizations, just can kind of take that challenge and reframe it into an opportunity, right? And then advice for individuals struggling to get their foot in the door. Was that the question? Yeah. So my advice would be like back to that timeline that I had shared. Almost like throughout most of my 20s and into my early 30s, almost all the positions that I took were a result of the fact that I reached out, I called, I volunteered there. So all of a sudden I was like on their radar. I was like hanging out and stuffing envelopes and doing things and tabling. And so I would say, take a look at the 3 agencies or companies that you really want to work for, right? And then just figure out a way to physically be present there, or to have some kind of project that you're willing to do to take on. And then gradually make your mark by being there and getting to know someone, one person. That's your foot in the door. And I will tell you, it's incredibly effective. It's incredibly effective. It's really, I would say, don't expect to send out a resume online and wait for people to contact you. Like, look on LinkedIn, see where you have similar connections. Really hustle to try to be seen, because no one else is going to advocate for you but yourself.
That's very good advice. I think a lot of people are probably looking for that advice right now. I see a question from Tony. He says, in addition to the question about experience in the current climate, what about while also working full-time or over full-time? How to address that? So perhaps how do you balance your workload and the pandemic and your family, friends, hobbies, and interests?
Yes. So is this like a situation where you're working full-time in a different sector and then trying to switch over into a different field, Tony?
I'm not too sure.
I'm curious. If you can weigh in just to clarify, that'd be great, but I'll try to answer it broadly speaking. I think that one of the greatest opportunities of COVID is that we have flexibility to do things virtually now like we never did before. I also think it's going to change the landscape of the way that we work into the future, which is really good news for mothers or anyone who's going to be having or birthing or raising children. I mean, of course, the fathers too. But I would say if you have a full-time job and then you're trying to gain more experience, there's so much out there right now in terms of online courses and things that you can be taking, even for free, like through, I don't know if it's DevX or like the course through Stanford with Amberth Murray. There's a lot of courses actually like through Yale and Stanford and really extraordinary institutions that are free. Do those, take those, put those on your LinkedIn profile. Be expanding your own area of expertise. So when that job offer comes up or that conversation comes up, you have that in your wheelhouse. You have that kind of expertise to use and to sort of share with others. But I think it's a challenge working full time. But I think right now we have this unique opportunity of being in the middle of the pandemic where we're working from home and we can be a lot more flexible with the ways that we educate ourselves. So was he able to?
Yes, he did. He responded, yes, it is. So I think you addressed that quite nicely.
Okay, good.
So I'm just keeping track of the time. We have about 9 minutes left, so we'll try and do as many more questions as we can. Hannah's asked, have you ever experienced challenges to your faith through your work? And if so, how have you overcome them?
Thank you, Hannah, for that question. That's a really powerful one. I will say that, yes, absolutely. I have faced crisis in my faith doing work in international development. Some of the experiences that I've had in refugee camps, especially some of the stories that I've heard from the young women that I served at RefuSHE of torture and sexual violence and forced pregnancy really caused me to question very existential, broad theological questions like, the all-knowing presence and love of God. When you're faced with some of these realities that are so starkly different regionally than people in the West are used to encountering, it does shift something within yourself. And I think that wrestling with those questions, sort of like, the St. John of the Cross's dark night of the soul, there are these times where we need to re-examine, what we're doing, why, how does this shape and form our faith in a way that's actually maybe deeper and more profound and meaningful than it was before. But I think also just sitting, with the questions and the injustice, knowing that you are doing all that you can within your power to even just like shift the needle half of a degree is enough. And if it's a spiritual calling, I would say that it's okay to have, I think it's really normal, and I think it's healthy when faced with suffering to have existential crisis of faith. So I would say, like, plumb the depths of those, talk with people about those, read books that are, sort of along those similar lines of people who have gone through times of doubting and struggle with their faith, because it will take you deeper than you were before.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think we'll only have time for about 2 more questions, but if we don't get to you, please feel free to reach out to Alisa again on LinkedIn, connect with her there. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to answer them. I think we'll move to Alia, which They ask, how do you deal with cultural perceptions of women which contribute to gender-based violence in your work?
How do I deal with cultural perceptions of women? Sorry, can you say the second part of that again?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do you deal with cultural perceptions of women which contribute to gender-based violence in your work?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Well, first, I think it's interesting to note that with the Voices and Faces project, they were equipping women to share their stories before Me Too ever cracked open, right? And there's something really powerful in that activity of teaching women how to write. Because when you are forced to write, you have to reflect inward, and then you have to put something out on the page, right? You have to articulate your voice and your experience. And I think that when we're looking at cultural perceptions of women that are negative, we're not going to build a world free of violence against women in 5 or 10 or 20 years. This is a work that is going to be generational, right? And we're taking a long view in knowing that the work that we do now is going to bear fruit next week, next year, in the lives of our children and our children's children. So understanding that we're part of like a very long sort of process. And then I think most importantly, instilling in women, and in one woman at a time, even, one girl at a time, one student at a time, one writer at a time, that she's worthy, that she has a voice, that she's powerful, that she has a story to tell, right? These are ways that we can be, combating negative perceptions of women, but also ways that we can shape a broader public, right? Through let's get women to write op-eds. Let's have more women running for public office. Let's teach women how to be confident public speakers. So when they're in the public sphere, they're taking up space and they're speaking their truth. I think those are some of the most powerful ways that we can deal with, working against harmful perceptions of women, is empowering individual women to stand up in their rights, know their rights to stand up in them. And then of course, the broader issues of policy and advocacy are also really important too.
Amazing. So we just have time for one more quick question, and I'm going to read out Biljana's. Can you please give an example of creative fundraising you have done?
I love that question. Oh, that's a great question. Thanks, Biljana. Goodness, at this point I've done so many different types of fundraising. Creative. Okay, so one example of creative fundraising is when I was at RefuSHE. The girls make these beautiful hand-dyed scarves, right, and textiles. And so we wanted to do a really creative, cool fundraiser that would engage our local Chicago base, which is where the US headquarters are, with the work that's happening in Nairobi. And so we decided to utilize this Project Runway fashion show example and work with 10 local Chicago designers, give them the fabrics that the girls had made, and then be inspired by one girl's sort of story and creativity in the collective. And then we would do a fashion show every year at the Chicago Cultural Center, and all these people would come out, and it was the most beautiful celebration of this sort of really creative integration of Chicago design talent, Nairobi design talent. People bid on the designs. It was elevated and interesting and fun, and it also appealed to sort of the scene that a lot of Chicago people might be interested in terms of philanthropy. So that was a lot of fun and really exciting. And then, there are a million ways you can be creative in fundraising. So if you would like to have a chat offline, I'd be happy to share some resources with you.
Awesome, thank you. That's a great kind of example of thinking outside the box there. So thank you everyone for attending, and thank you so much, Alisa, for talking to us about your story and answering our questions. Before we end, I have a few just announcements. I would like to make sure everyone is aware of the next Make an Impact event, which is taking place tomorrow at 4 p.m. GMT with Gulnaz Ihani, who is in the position of Sustainability Manager at Stanton Williams, to oversee all the sustainability requirements of the practice and its project. She will be discussing climate change and other environmental topics within the workplace. Gulnaz will let you know how you can make a positive impact on the world in a sustainable manner. I would also like to share with you a project that is being run through the University of Sussex Students' Union. If you're able to see this, basically the Career Equity Project is a collaboration between the University of Sussex Students' Union and the Careers and Employability Centre, and it focuses on giving additional career support to students from marginalized communities. So they have tons of events coming up. They have lots of the project aims, why they're doing this. You can get in touch with them at events@sussexstudent.com. And some of the workshops coming up are Access in the Workplace, Career Equity Project with first generation students, Career Equity Project for BAME students, personal branding workshops. They have tons of different events that you can get involved in. You can go to this link up here to find out sussexstudent.com/what's-on/career-equity-project to get involved with that. And then I'd also just really quickly like to say that there are a few jobs open to University of Sussex students. I'm actually a race equity advocate as well. I'm an REA for the Law, Politics, and Sociology faculty. And our aim is to work to close the Sussex awarding gap, which is a gap between the disparity between degree outcomes between non-BAME students and BAME students who are Black, Asian, and are minority ethnic. And right now we have roles open to pharmacy students, education, social work students, and foundation year students. So if you're interested in advocating for your peers and doing so through educational conversation, feedback groups, and talking with senior management in your school, feel free to apply to these. But I believe that is all. Again, thank you so much, Alisa, and thank you to everyone. We had a great turnout, and I hope to see you at some of our future events.